For a long time, it might have seemed like if you wanted a good electric car, you needed incredibly deep pockets, or you just needed to accept that what you were buying wasn't as good as a fuel-powered alternative. But the Skoda Enyaq is a brilliant example of how far EVs have come in recent years. It's a fantastic fully electric SUV, and it's just had some updates. In this review, we're telling you what's new and what it's like. But first, this video is supported by PodPoint, winner of our Best Home EV Charger Test 2023. Look in our description below to find out more. So these changes include more power, quicker charging speeds, a better range, and an updated infotainment system. All of which sounds pretty great and suggests an already excellent EV has just got even better. But is that really the case? Well, let's run through the changes in a bit more detail first. So you can still choose between this regular SUV Enyaq or a coupe version, and all these updates are the same for both models of the car. But previously you had a choice between a 60, an 80 or a performance-focused VRS version of the Enyaq. Now, after these updates, the 80 has changed to become an 85. If you go for this 85 model or the VRS, then you get a new electric motor, which in the 85 means you have an extra 80 brake horsepower compared to the previous model, which means the 0 to 62 time is 2 seconds quicker than it was before. And in the VRS, you get an extra 40 brake horsepower, which makes 0 to 62 1 second quicker than in the pre-updated Enyaq. If you go for a 60 version of this car though, then that is mechanically unchanged. The electric motor might be new, but the 85 model gets the same 77 kilowatt-hour battery from before. However, it's said to have been optimised with more advanced thermal management, which sounds pretty fancy, but the difference here in terms of range isn't as noticeable as the power boost that this car's had. So in total, it's only enough really to add about 15 miles extra to the official range of this 85 model. That means in the regular SUV version of the Enyaq, the official range is 348 miles. If you go for the coupe version of this car, then it's 353 miles, which is pretty good for the money. There's been an increase in the maximum charging speeds as well, but if you go for a 60 or an 85 model, then actually they're unchanged. If, however, you go for a four-wheel drive 85X or a VRS, then the maximum charging rate they can now accept is 175 kilowatts, which means at that fastest speed, you can get a 10 to 80% top up in 28 minutes, which is around 8 minutes quicker than before. There has also been a change on the outside, but it's rather hard to notice. Let's play Spot the Difference and we'll tell you at the end what's changed. Inside, as we said, there's been an update to the infotainment system, but of all the changes to the new Enyaq, this is probably the least noticeable because the only real things to point out are some new shortcut buttons to these features along the top. You've got some new graphics on the inbuilt sat-nav as well, but something useful that you get now is a preconditioning function. So if you're using the inbuilt sat-nav and it's taking you to a charging stop, on your way there, the car will get the battery at an optimum temperature to achieve, hopefully, the maximum charging rate when you get to your charging stop. However, that will only work using Skoda's sat-nav. If you're using Waze or Google Maps through Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, then that function won't work, which is a shame. But to be honest, that's the same for all other electric cars with a preconditioning feature. There's also been an update to the voice command system, so you can say, "Hey Laura, play BBC Radio 5 Live."
BBC 5 Live.
And it will be reasonably responsive, which is good because most voice command systems are not impressive at all. But aside from those minor updates, this is very much the same as before. So every Enyaq gets this 13-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which is nice and high up on the dashboard here, which means it's easy to see, easy to reach. It is a shame though that the climate controls are adjusted through the touchscreen here. But still, at least the screen is reasonably responsive and it's got lots of functions as well. Elsewhere in this interior, there isn't really anything new to point out, so it's just the same as it was before, which means lots of things are very good about it, like this driving position, which does feel high up, like you're in an SUV, noticeably higher than a Kia EV6 or a Hyundai Ioniq 5. This driver display does have pretty small text, but at least it's always easy to see the screen itself, and it's very difficult to block it with the steering wheel. And it also impresses in here in terms of quality. So we're in a loft model, which has this fabric on the dashboard here. Seems nicely finished. Not all of the materials feel amazing though, so you've got quite a lot of hard, cheap feeling plastics around, but it generally does feel very well screwed together, and it's on a par with the Model Y when it comes to build quality. But what really stands out up front, and indeed for the Enyaq as a whole, is the practicality that's on offer here. So not only is there loads of space for the driver and the front passenger, but the storage that you have is really incredible. You've got loads on the center console, you've got these 2 cup holders which you can rearrange, you've got this tray further back, you've got this nicely padded armrest which underneath gives you 1 storage compartment here, a massive storage compartment underneath it, as well as this other thing that you can remove. And then you have underneath this whole center console, you've got an extra storage compartment there as well, plus carpeted door bins. And in fact, the only real negative to say from a practicality perspective is the fact that the glove box is a little bit stingy. But apart from that, just like before, this is a really great interior. The Enyaq is huge in the back. You can see that, particularly in terms of headroom, it is incredibly generous. That's thanks to the tall, boxy SUV styling of this thing. Legroom is also amazing. There's space for your feet under the seat in front of you. Even if you're a tall adult sat back here, you can properly stretch out and relax. And if you want to fit 3 people back here, this is also a pretty good car for that. You might be staring at this storage compartment thing down here, thinking that that doesn't look particularly great for whoever's sat in this seat. But the good thing is, you can just pick it up and remove it to reveal a nice flat floor back here. Now, compared to the coupe version of the Enyaq, this ultimately is more practical and more spacious in the back when it comes to headroom. But it must be said that the coupe version of the Enyaq is still very good in its rear seats, and it's only going to be particularly tall adults sat in the back who might have a problem with the reduced headroom back there. In terms of drawbacks with the Enyaq here, it's only really things that it can't do. So these rear seats can't slide or recline, and there's only 5 of them. This isn't a 7-seater, but still, in all other respects, this is very generous in the back. The main boot compartment in the back of the Enyaq is absolutely vast. This is a really big open space. You can see you've got these storage compartments either side at the front, and you can remove these things if you want to make use of the extra width available. Very easily put them back in as well. You've also got some handy hooks up here. You've got underfloor storage, which is very useful for your charging cables. And in total, we could fit 9 carry-on size suitcases into the back of the Enyaq below the tonneau cover, which is the same that a Model Y can fit, but the Tesla does go one further by fitting an extra suitcase in its front boot. Unfortunately, the Enyaq doesn't get one of those, which is a shame and a bit of a missed opportunity to make an already very practical car even better. But there is another way that you can make the Enyaq even more practical than it is a standard, and that is by adding the transport package. If you do that, then you get some netting in the cargo area. You also get a height adjustable boot floor. So with that, it means you can remove a bit of this loading lip at the front here, and it also means there isn't as much of a step up from the boot floor to the rear seats if you flatten them down at the back there. And if you're wondering how this compares to the coupe version, well, there isn't as much of a difference as you might expect. In the coupe, we can fit 1 less suitcase in the boot of the Enyaq coupe compared to this regular SUV version, and that still, especially for a coupe SUV, is a very practical car. So really, whichever version of the Enyaq you go for, they are very, very practical indeed. Now, the practicality side of things is the same as it was before these updates. Where you can notice a difference with the Enyaq now is on the road. We're in the new 85 model, which, as we've said, is a lot more powerful than the 80 that it replaces, and in total it has 281 brake horsepower, and it really does feel quick. In fact, at low speeds, the accelerator response can be a bit snappy, which if you're in something like a sports car or a sports SUV, then fair enough, you might see that as a positive. But this is obviously just a big family SUV, where things should be smooth, controlled, so it maybe is a bit of a shame that you do have to be quite gentle with your accelerator inputs, but those occurrences are pretty rare, and it doesn't take too much effort to dial into driving this smoothly. And you can also stick it in eco mode to help things out as well. If you do really want a fully electric, sporty SUV, then there is an Enyaq VRS. However, that is still a big, heavy car. It's not particularly fun or exciting to drive, and ultimately, considering the rivals that it's up against, it's difficult to recommend. But if you take that out of the picture, the rest of the Enyaq lineup is really very good on the road. And okay, none of them might be particularly exciting or fun to drive, but the handling in all of the models, the 60, the 85 and the four-wheel drive 85X, is very tidy, predictable, calm. It's got light, precise steering, so you can place this car with decent confidence around a corner. It stays relatively upright as well. It's just a good thing to drive. And on top of that, this, for the money, is one of the most comfortable electric cars around. It can feel a little bit unsettled around town, but on faster roads especially, things smooth out and it's really just a nice car to sit in. You can hear the suspension thumping around a little bit, but aside from that, there really isn't much noise. You can also, by the way, get an adaptive suspension setup, but you've got to pay extra for that. And to be honest, because the regular setup is so good, and because the adaptive suspension setup costs so much, we just stick with what you get as standard. So if you want to buy an Enyaq, which one should you go for and what options should you add? Well, when it comes to a choice between this regular SUV version of the car and the coupe SUV, just bear in mind that even if you do love the looks of the coupe, it's less practical and more expensive. So given a choice between the two, we'd point you in this direction. The 60 is worth considering if you're looking for just a practical run around and you're only going to do an occasional long journey. But we think overall the 85 is the pick of the lineup. You can't get that 60 version with the coupe either, bear in mind. And even though the 85 is more expensive, it gets you a really useful amount of extra range. We took a 60 Enyaq and put it through a real-world range test in perfect summery conditions, and from full to flat, it managed 208 miles in real-world driving conditions. The official range of the 85 is 100 miles further than the official range of the 60. Now, it's unlikely you'll actually achieve an extra 100 miles over the entry-level car, but still, it's clear you will get a very useful extra chunk of range for this more expensive model. If you're desperate for four-wheel drive, by the way, there is an 85X, but that and the VRS push the price up too high to recommend. You get a decent amount of kit as standard on the entry-level version of the Enyaq, like dual-zone climate control and cruise control, but that entry-level trim, which doesn't actually have a name, is only available with the 60 version of the Enyaq. We'd still recommend going for edition trim because it adds things like heated front seats, 3-zone climate control and adaptive cruise control. You get solid energy blue paint as standard, but you'll probably want to upgrade to one of the metallic choices for £660. There's also an exclusive velvet red metallic option, but that is more than £1,000. We'd also definitely stick with the standard 19-inch alloys because they offer the best ride comfort. So it doesn't really make much sense to pay more money for the 20-inch or 21-inch alloys when they make the ride worse as well. Inside, you need to make a design selection. You have to choose between Loft, Lounge, Suite and Eco Suite, and whichever one you go for determines things like how the dashboard is finished and what material it gets. Now, this is a Loft model. It's the only one that doesn't cost extra, so if you do prefer the look of the others, fair enough, but then you will have to pay. You can, if you really want, make your Enyaq look like this, with the so-called crystal face grille. But if you do really want that, then it's only part of the expensive advanced package, so it's difficult to recommend, and not just because of how expensive it is. There are quite a few other options to choose from, but the only one that we'd really recommend is the transport package. We did mention it earlier, and it gets you some netting in the boot as well as a height adjustable boot floor and some very handy levers that helps you lower the rear seats from the boot itself. So if you regularly carry lots of things in the back of your Enyaq, it's a bit of a no-brainer to add, particularly because it's very reasonably priced. You can also, by the way, add a heat pump, which makes heating the interior of your Enyaq more efficient in cold conditions. However, we've done some research recently which suggests that you're unlikely to ever earn back the money that you've had to spend on the heat pump in the first place. Click on that link to find out more. And what about that styling difference? Well, of course, it is back here, where you can see IV has been removed from the back of the car and taken out of the Enyaq's name, because officially it used to be called the Skoda Enyaq IV, but no one ever really called it that, did they? So now it's just the Skoda Enyaq. So the new Enyaq is much like the old one. It's practical, good to drive, smart inside, and if you avoid the more expensive versions, then it's great value as well. If you're looking for an electric SUV, then this should definitely be on your shortlist. Thanks for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click up there and make sure you're subscribed to see all of our other new reviews as soon as they go live. And if you want to find out more about the Enyaq, or if you want a great deal on one, then click on that link to go to whatcar.com.